Hey you guys, this is Emily Lopez with You Can DIY, and today I'm gonna show you guys how I built this beautiful railing on a super tight budget. If you stay tuned till the end, I'll show you how much it costs and break down all the materials. When we started this project, I had an inspiration picture that I had on a Pinterest board. I have no idea where it's from. So if my inspo picture, I'll show it to you guys, is yours or you know where it's from, let me know and I'll make sure to add that in the comments below. But we had this beautiful inspo picture. It looked really high end, really professional. And I was like, okay, we're gonna try it, but I don't think it's gonna turn out that good. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised with how beautiful this project turned out, especially considering things like these posts are from budget 4x4 boards from my Home Depot. Nothing here is really high-end wood or materials. Let's get to it.
In my case, I had the whole subfloor out, so I was able to make really sturdy connections for these posts underneath the structure and make nice framing and get them attached in really well. If your floor is already in place and you don't want to tear everything up, you can use one of these Newell post attachment kits. For my middle post, I just bolted it in through the side, but on that end post, because that pathway was already so thin, I notched out my 4x4, so half of it went over the step and half of it was able to be bolted in through the side. Then I took my measurements for my top beam and I cut a 45-degree angle in the two that came together on the corner. The pieces on the upper deck were easier because everything was at the same level, so I could lay them in place and then screw everything down. The one further to the side that ran into perpendicular the other Newell post, that one was a little bit tougher because I had no way to hold it, so I got a square and a clamp and I got a level and I got it exactly where I wanted, and then I bolted in from the opposite side of that post. Now we're going to start to prep the wood. These 4x4s that the main structure is built out of were just plain 4x4s from Home Depot, so we really had to pay a lot of attention to pre-treating the wood before I painted it to make sure we got the really good quality finish that we wanted. So when I bought the wood, and even the wood for the horizontal beams, I bought it several days in advance and I let it acclimate to the house because, as you know, wood moves and it does need to acclimate. So we did do that before we started putting everything together. We went ahead and we filled everything with wood filler, wood bondo, whatever your preference is. And then every time you see this hose connected to my air compressor, this is just a little air gun and I'm blowing off sawdust or from sanding and wiping that away. Fill in all of your imperfections, wood knots, screw marks, anything that you want to cover up, and then sand down and wipe off all the debris. Then we're going to use this product that I got on Amazon. It's called Aqua Coat. It is a cabinet grain filler. So people use this when they paint their cabinets and they have old wood cabinets with grain and they don't want that to show up when they paint it. And so in my case, I purchased this. I saw some reviews that people complained, but it's because they did not follow the instructions. You have to do 3 coats of this product it recommends, and it has the instructions on the back and how to sand in between. So this takes quite a few coats. You can either put this on with like a credit card or a gift card, a Bondo applicator. I used a 4-inch drywall knife. And then one of the things it says is you can just rub it on with your hand with a glove on it, and then you can sand it after. And that's what I did. And that was the easiest method ultimately. You are going to do this at least 3 times to fill in the grain all the way. So follow the instructions or it's not going to work like you want it to. But I used it and it worked like a charm because I followed their instructions. Once all my prep, sanding, multiple coats was done, I primed this with Bin Shellac primer. Now, I did spray my final coat, but the primer, because this is a shellac base, I was scared to put this through my paint sprayer since it's not a water base, and I just didn't want to risk it. So I did put the primer on with a brush. The black paint you're seeing on here was just from the samples that I had tested. After I finished priming, I took a 220 grit sandpaper and I sanded everything down really well. And then I wiped it down with a damp cloth. And then I used my blowgun to blow all the dust and debris off so I didn't have any particles on the banister before I started to spray it. I taped off everything I wanted to protect from overspray since I was going to spray with a spray gun. Then I strained my paint with a paint strainer to try to prevent any particles from going in and clogging my gun. Now, you don't have to use a sprayer if you don't have one. If you are going to paint this by hand, I would recommend a couple things. One, using a high density foam roller because that's going to help your finish look a little just less brush strokey. And then there's an additive you can add to latex paint. It's called Floetrol. It's Floetrol. And you can add that in and it makes paint dry a little bit slower. And so you're less likely to have brush marks and streaks from having a quick dry time. I used an alkyd paint here and it requires 2 coats. So I did spray 2 coats of this paint on. The paint I selected is a Sherwin-Williams color and it's called Black Magic. And I did this in a satin finish. For the best possible finish, sand with 220 grit sandpaper between coats, but make sure you're getting all that debris from sanding removed before you put on your next coat. Athena checked everything out and made sure we were ready to move on to the next phase. She gave this one the paw of approval and 2 paws up. Trim the edges of the wood you're going to be working with because these don't come from the store with a clean edge. I took my measurements for my horizontal banisters and then I made a spacer block so that my measurements between each side were always exactly the same. I made 2, so when I was assembling this, I didn't have to measure. I could just hold those in place and glue and nail everything in. I did a preliminary sand before I started assembling everything, and then I used glue and brad nails to hold it together, and then I did screw everything also to secure it and make it nice and strong. After sanding, I left the wood the natural tone and I sealed it with a water-based spray sealer and I did 4 coats. And before the final coat, I sanded with 220 grit sandpaper and then did my final coat. I lifted my pre-assembled pieces into place. You can see at the bottom, I used spacer blocks again on each side. That just made it a little bit easier to hold everything in place and not have to worry about exact measurements because I had those spacer blocks. And then I pre-drilled each of my sides and checked level and kind of finagled from side to side to get it exactly how I wanted it. And then I secured everything into place on all 3 panels. In this case, I made 3 separate panels. I sealed all my nail holes with natural toned wood filler, and then once that dried, I sanded it down with 220 grit sandpaper. I ended up spending $46.05 on 4x4s, $24.43 on 1x2s, $137.47 on 2x2s, $24.89 on bin primer, and I had a lot left over, $23.30 on my alkyd paint. My grain filler was $26.25, and my spray sealer was $15.88. My total was $298.27. Now, there were a lot of things I had that I didn't have to buy that would add a little bit to your total if you did. For instance, I had nail glue, brad nails, screws, bolts, and sandpaper that I didn't have to purchase because I already had them. But even if you added $50 for those items to your total, you'd still be at $348.27. So you'd still be under $350. So for me, at $298.27, I'm super happy with how this project turned out.